All right, we are recording right now. We are recording. So, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are on to Parshat Mishpatim. And this is a different type of parsha. In a way, we were sort of transitioning to it with the Aseret HaDibrot, with the Ten Commandments. But this particular parsha has an overabundance of specific laws, especially civil law. And so in this particular edition with Torah Temimah, this kind of stuff, he just goes crazy with. Look at that. So here's the actual biblical verse, and this is all the Torah Temimah on it. I mean, it's just incredible amounts. Sometimes, as you can see here, there's not even any Torah text on this page. He's just citing other sources and then doing his commentary. So I wanted to do a little bit of that, God willing, today, if we can. But of course, we'll start off with the regular text and then with the Rashi. So, Ve'ela HaMishpatim. And these are the ordinances, Asher Tasim Lifnehem, which you will place before them. So give me one moment here. Okay. Let's take a look at the Rashi. Ve'ela HaMishpatim. So again, you've already gotten used to some extent, right? The way in which our commentators put a magnifying glass, if not a microscope, on the texts, that they are going to look at every nuance to try and pull it out, because there's such a love of this text. This is something as a Jewish people, and if you want to talk about, Jewish culture, or what marks Jewish culture, it's this love of this text ultimately and other texts subsequently. So he says, and this is in Shemot Rabbah, there's this general rule, Kol makom she'enamar ela, where a sentence starts with ela, these, right? So the demonstrative pronoun these is understood to mean these as opposed to those. So if it just says ela, pasal et harishonim, it cuts off. In other words, it's starting a new subject, totally new subject. It cuts off the previous material. However, this one little letter, ve'ela, and these, mosif al harishonim, adds, in other words, it comes to add to what preceded. And the specific interpretation goes, ma harishonim misinai, just as the earlier laws came from Sinai, af elu misinai. These two are from Sinai. By the way, if you don't know this already, if you have a tikkun and you take out the tikkun and you look at the top of the page and the very first word in the Hebrew text of the tikkun, you'll notice that it starts with a letter vav, that all but six columns start with the letter vav. And the letter vav means hook. Because if you think about it, the word and hooks what comes before and what comes after. That's the function of a letter vav, of the word and the letter vav, which means and. And in the tabernacle, we read about the hooks that were used to hang the curtains, and they're known as the vaveh, the hooks, ha'amudim, of the columns, because there were these columns that on which they would hang the curtains of the tabernacle that surrounded the tabernacle. And so we have this play on words because, of course, the columns of the Torah, of writing in the Torah, are columns. We use the same term, amud, and vaveh ha'amudim. So we have this implied reference when we study Torah to the original tabernacle that was there. Just a little bit more information on that. So
Very nice tidbit.
yeah. Velama, so but listen, this begs a question. Velama nismecha parshat dinin the parshat mizbeach. The last thing we read had to do with not using steps to climb up to the altar. Remember, the original altar in the tabernacle had a ramp that was a sloping ramp, so that they did not climb up, that you didn't get up onto the altar by means of steps. You used this ramp. But we will see that this is also used as a metaphor. But the question still is, what do Valama Nismecha Parshat Dinin? Why does a section on civil law? Okay, what does it have? Why is it connected? Lama Nismecha. Why is it connected? The Parshat Mizbeach, to a section that deals with the altar. Inference, Lomar Lacha, to tell you, Shetasim Sanhedrin, that you should place the location of the great Sanhedrin, Etzel Hamikdash, near the sanctuary. Sfarim Acherim, other manuscripts have Hamizbeach, Etzel Hamizbeach, near the altar. Ufirush, and what it's talking about is Ba'azara, in the courtyard. And indeed, in the temple, there was an area, a hall or a room called Lishkat Hagazit, the chamber of hewn stone, which was where this great Sanhedrin used to sit. And again, Torah Temimah is going to show also the significance of the connection, right? So he will pull us a little further than Rashi along the significance of this connection of Mishpatim to the last statement about not going up steps on the altar.
And it goes perfectly with what you just said about the hooks and the columns.
Right. That it's interconnected, that one is not
that's
separated from the other. Right.
Right.
So, Asher Tasim Lifnehem, which you shall place before them. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, Lo ta'ale al da'cha, don't consider for one moment, lomar, to think, Eshaneh lahem haperek b'ha'alacha, I will teach them the chapter and the halacha. Shtaim, mean bet, of course, is the number 2, or gimel number 3, 2 or 3 pa'amim times, ad shetahes dura b'fihim, until they can recite it, okay, until it's organized in their mouth, right? Until they can say it, kemishnata, word for word. Just so they're going to learn it and be able to parrot it word for word. They will know it. But I'm not going to go to the trouble lahavinam to explain to them ta'amei hadavar, the reasons of that particular law, upirusho, and explanations, its explanation. So you shouldn't even consider the fact that you should just, when I say teach it to them, you don't just have to teach it to them so that they can repeat it, so that they can memorize it. Right? They have to understand what they're saying. There has to be comprehension. Lachach ne'emar, and for this reason, it says, Asher tasim lifnehem, which you will place before them, keshulchan ha'aruch, like a prepared table, umuchan le'echol, so that you can sit down and eat, lifnei ha'adam, before a person, like a prepared table with food on it, so that they can sit and enjoy and appreciate and enjoy the meal. And there's such a beautiful connection between physical food, so the pleasure one gets out of enjoying a good meal, that's well prepared. You don't just come to a meal and there are all the ingredients and now you have to fix it yourself, as opposed to sitting down and enjoying the meal that's well prepared, and the fact that what we are doing is a spiritual meal. and that the satisfaction that you get from wonderful, especially some of us I know are foodies, I include myself, right? And the pleasure you get out of studying Torah. Lifnehem, before them. This is in Tractate Gittin 88. So there's a diuk, meaning the emphasis placed on before them as opposed to, right? Velo lifnei umot ovdei elilim, and not before idolaters. So I think it's significant that it says idolaters here, ovdei elilim, those who worship idols, as opposed to simply other religions. And I know there are those, not here, obviously, present company accepted, who think anything short of Judaism is an idolatry. But I think that we can also make a diuk on this particular expression as well. So otherwise it could
Yeah,
say umot ha'olam, okay? Because you're going to see there's an issue here. Va'afilu
yeah.
yad
Kabbalah says Gentiles, but I agree with you. It specifically says idol worshipers.
yes.
And you have to remember the time in which Rashi was writing.
Absolutely, Golda. Well,
Back to the history.
you have to contextualize. But
Mhm.
anyway, va'afilu yadata b'din echad, even if you realize in a certain particular law, shehem daninoto kedinei Israel, that they also have the same rules of adjudication regarding a specific law. Al tavi'a ba'archaot shelahim. Do not take that case to one of their tribunals. But this is the point here. Shehamavi dinei Yisrael lifnei aramim, because one who brings the laws of Israel, that is to say, a case, a Jewish case, before Arameans, mechalel et Hashem, profanes the name, that is, of course, profanes God's name, umeyaker et shem ha'elelim, and also then shows honor, raises, gives value to the name of their idol, lahashbicham, to praise them, sfarim acherim, other manuscripts, lahachashivam, to give them importance. Shene'emar, why are you not allowed to do this? Because in Deuteronomy 32, there's a verse in the shir that Moses has to teach them. Kilo ketsurenu, this is from Ha'azinu. Kilo ketsurenu tsuram, for our rock is not like their rock. Ve'oivenu pelilim, when our enemies are our judges. Keshe'oivenu plilim, when our enemies are judges, zehu edut le'ilui yiratam. This is testimony to the magnification or the raising up of the ones they fear. In other words, of their idols. So, judgment, the fact, law, judgment, it's very significant, and it's an incredible amount of power. And from a Jewish perspective, especially because we consider here we are going to be talking about civil cases, and yet we don't just take religious law under consideration. We also are looking at everyday common practice of law, the application of law to society, and what a profound influence it has, and that it leads to a society that is flourishing and that's doing well. So, I think, again, one has to understand these things in a circumstantial kind of way. I would certainly say without any question that in American law, in American jurisprudence, there is, we say on our coinage, "In God we trust." Well, sometimes I wonder if the coinage is because they believe in money, but if the money's the God. But I'd say that, of course, that in truth, I think that this is not a case that if you have to take your case to trial and you're going to an American court, you are not somehow, desecrating God in that process. This certainly would seem to beg some comment on your part. So if you'd like to chime in at this point, that would be just fine. If you have any questions or thoughts.
Well, we can go to civil courts because civil courts are, we can go to our own courts, so that shouldn't be a problem. But when it's a Jewish thing, absolutely, we should go within,
Okay, the point he's making, though, the point that
Right.
the Gemara is making, though, is it's any kind of case. So it's not.
But we have to kind of abide by. We can't do that in this the way the country is set up right now.
Correct. It is
Well,
not set up this way at all.
Right.
So Friday, in the class with Rabbi Arno, we talked about the meaning of taking the Lord's name in vain, or swearing false oaths, or whatever
Right.
all that meant. And I mean, so in American courts, I mean, you're swearing on the Bible in God's name.
Right.
And in Judaism, there are only certain times that you're supposed to do that. But if you do that, you have to make sure you're as 100% forthcoming and truthful as you can be.
Right.
Because it's a major thing, not just committing perjury, but religiously a major sin to use God's name and be something other than is 100% truthful. And by that, but you have to, that's why I kind of asked a question that wasn't really answered, I'm sorry, but there's a huge hairy wood. Oh God, he's okay, you can't hear it. But it's a rare bird at our feeder. So anyway, but whether you could say something like, tell the truth with a caveat, to the best of my knowledge, because there's a difference between swearing to tell the truth, I would think, and putting that kind of qualifying additional part on it.
Correct.
In terms of swearing under God's name.
Yes. It's essentially saying that there's an inference there, just as to how profound an effect, and the need for a court to establish a just decision based on the truth. That if it's not based on the truth, there's no way it can be a good decision or a just decision. So, and it's, I think it's a way, I think sometimes we get caught up in language, and so there are people who have a real problem talking about God, right? And yet, if you think about it, at least this is what I think about it, is that God is a term that it's like shorthand, and it includes in it, when we use terms such as divine and things like that, we are talking about some sense of awareness of the grandeur and greatness and incomprehensibility and ineffability of the universe in which we live, and that we recognize that what we say has implications that we cannot even begin to understand. Words matter, and it's like you could underline the word matter, 1,000 times, because we just don't even know. Here I'm talking to all of you, and each one of you is processing what I'm saying to you in your own unique kind of way, and also the impressions that these things have in our minds, which are not necessarily cognitive. And so you have to be so careful. There's a beautiful midrash that says that the world shook when the commandment not to give, false testimony was given in the Ten Commandments. Because we see the effect of falsehood and its destructive force within society and in the world. So And that's a shame that people have, such a problem, because I think if they understood that it really had to do with trying to find a way to express the inexpressible, maybe they wouldn't have such a problem. And I've said to you, I think some of you have heard me say it before, that very often I'm tempted to be flip when someone says, "I don't believe in God," I like to say to them, well, maybe the God you don't believe in is the God I don't believe in either. And it's because we don't talk about it. We don't try to understand it, because because we know in the final analysis, we're never going to fully understand it. But the truth is, there's so many things we don't fully understand, but we speak of them, we talk about them. Language itself is an approximation, but it's an incredible approximation. So let me, if then I have a little time, I want to start plowing into the Torah Temimah, and I hope you, again, find it very satisfying. So just notice here how he comments on Va'ela here, he comments on Va'ela HaMishpatim here, he comments about Va'ela HaMishpatim here, he comments about Va'ela HaMishpatim here, and he does it again here. That there is so much that when it comes to the halachic elements of the Torah, there is just so much to say. So let's as I said, let's plow into this. Ve'ela, and these, Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer. So he's going to give us the sources that Rashi refers to, but he's going to try and give us as much as possible the original sources. Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael says, and of course Rabbi Yishmael is an incredibly important Tana. He and Rabbi Akiva are essentially interlocutors. Ve'ela, he's the one who teaches. Ve'ela mosif al harishonim. It comes to add on to what has preceded it. Ma elyonim mi Sinai. Here's what Rashi said, right? Just as the ones above are from Sinai, af hatachtonim mi Sinai, so too the ones below, in other words, that follow, are also from Sinai. And this is from the Mechilta, and that is a halachic midrash on the book of Exodus, essentially starting with chapter 12, which is where the halachot start because of the halacha of Pesach. And let's find the place. So this is now his Torah Temimah's thoughts on this. Ritzono lomar, what is he trying to say? Disvarale, that he holds, he argues, Demashin emar besof parshat Yitro, that what was said at the end of the parsha of Yitro, of Jethro, and here's the word, Moshe nigash el ha'arafel, Moses went up into the mist, into the cloud. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God said to Moses, Ko tomar el bnei Yisrael, thus shall you say to the children of Israel, etc. Nimshacha amira zo, that statement continues ad la'achar parshat Mishpatim, actually applies to all that came after it, including up to the very end of Parshat Mishpatim. Dichtiv sham, because in Parshat Mishpatim, at the end of all those laws, it says, Ve'el Moshe amar ale el Hashem. And to Moses he said, go up to Hashem. Uviyichud tzarich Rabbi Yishmael l'drasha zo, and Rabbi Yishmael he especially requires this interpretation, the shitato, according to his approach, bizvachim, which is mentioned in the tractate Zvachim, page 115b, dechol mitzvot HaTorah, that all the mitzvahs of the Torah, ne'emaru b'Sinai, rak bichlalan, they were stated at Sinai only in their general expression. Ashme'in, so not, in other words, they weren't specified. They didn't get down to every specification of the laws. They were stated in their general sense. Ashme'inan, and so we infer from this, kan, here, the parsha zo ne'emra bifrata b'Sinai, that this particular parsha was stated specifically at Sinai. Now, I will tell you that the prat is means specific, and here he's saying they were said in general. Okay, I know what he's trying to say. He's saying that if it weren't for Rabbi Yishmael's express statement, we might have inferred, okay, that this particular parsha was stated specifically. And we need to understand that it wasn't, because it was also stated at Sinai. Vehine, and behold, and in fact, lichora mashma, it appears on the surface. Lichora means, apparently. Mashma, we can infer the palig Rabbi Yishmael, that Rabbi Yishmael disagrees a baraita regarding a baraita. A baraita is a text that dates from Mishnaic times, but is not included in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah has it's a book, it contains specific laws, etc., but there are also material texts called baraitot that are quoted elsewhere, like in the Talmud, for example, and they are not included in the Mishnah, and one of the inferences of that they weren't included in the Mishnah is that they don't have quite the authority of a Mishnah. That if it's in the Mishnah, it has authority, a greater authority than a baraita. And the word baraita means outside. It's an Aramaic word meaning outside. And here it means a text that is outside the Mishnah. The Sanhedrin. So there's a baraita mentioned in the tractate Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Vav, page 56b, Shedarshu Sham, that there they interpret the al hadinin nitztavu b'mara, that regarding these civil laws, they were commanded at Mara. And Mara is mentioned back in, I believe, Parshat Beshalach, and that, those bitter waters that had to be sweetened, and that is the place where these particular laws that we're going to be dealing with now in Parshat Mishpatim were actually commanded by God to Moses at Mara, as opposed to Mount Sinai. Aval be'emet, but in fact, yesh lomar, one can say, disvarale, that Rabbi Yishmael holds, I think that's who he's referring to here. Desham nitztavu al haklaliyot. Okay. All right. So I don't think sferale means it's referring to the people in this baraita, that in this baraita, it might imply Desham nitztavu al haklaliyot, that back in Mara, they were commanded regarding their general sense, so the various shiadunu bein adam lechavero, that is to say that they needed to adjudicate disputes between a man and his neighbor and his friend. V'chan biyachad, v'chan bi'er hapratiot. But here up on Mount Sinai, they then begin to explain the details. Kol din kamavuar b'parsha. Every specific law as is explained in the parsha. V'yoter nir'eh. Okay, and more it appears. Sheyoter me'asher meforash bazeh nitztavu misinai, and that even more that is explained regarding here, they were commanded at Sinai. The ra'aya, okay, and there is a proof, I believe, shahare, that in fact the darshu hapasuk shebesamuch v'avado le'olam, because they interpret the verse that says that is coming up very soon, because it talks about Hebrew slaves. va'avador le'olam, and he should be his servant forever. Le'olamo shel yovel. That it doesn't mean perpetually. It doesn't mean that this person is going to be this man's slave forever, le'olam, but it means le'olamo shel yovel. But it means to the world, quote, quote, of the Jubilee year. In other words, that in the Jubilee year, the slave has to go free. V'lo niskar kan remez me'inyan yovel ad parshat bahar. And the fact is, how do they interpret that here in this context, okay, when there is no mention of the Jubilee year until Parshat Bahar? And that's already in Leviticus. Elavadai, but it's clear, vadai. The kan nifratu kol pratei hamitzvot, that here was detailed, all the details of the commandments, the nistadru b'Torah parshiot, but they were then arranged in the Torah according to their parshas, the way they are in the parsha. So this is, I admit, when I read this the first time, I had a better sense of what was going on than my attempt to explain it to you now, because it looks for sure as if he is saying, right, that he disagrees with this baraita. So unless he's saying something else, let's go ahead.
It's after 10,
Okay, all right.
and I think, yeah, I think that was a stopping place in the text
Yeah,
anyway.
no, I understand. All right. Okay, I will need to look this over again. I need to review this and make sure I can explain it in a better way tomorrow. So let me stop the screen sharing. And I'm also going to stop the recording.